I'm hoping it's going to be, yeah, well, we'll see in a bit. Your dream yesterday sparked a lot of conversation too.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Ooh, too bad I
All
missed
right.
it.
Yeah, well, yeah, we will talk about it
Oh, good.
later. Okay. All
Good.
right, let's see. Mary. Okay.
Oh, Kevin, good.
Yeah, there we go. Hi, guys. How you doing?
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Hey.
Well, we had quite a, oh, here's Lewis is here. Okay, and Stuart is here. Get going here. Yeah, I thought we had a really good dream session last night with everybody, Charles and you know, I've been thinking about him. I might have more to say about him later, but anyway.
Yeah, Ivan's dream was really great.
Yeah, well, so yeah, I mean, there was just a lot to it that I have since got into. Hi, Kevin, Lewis, and Jan. Well, I thought what we do today, and I mean, you guys can definitely, but I just thought it. What I really got out of Hillman's, you know, talk about his images is it really is. People who've read it have said that they could tell from just the way he wrote that this was he really had a he has learned it from experience. I mean, he's done a lot of image work, but the way he presents it is very enlightening to the task of what images are and why they're important, you know. So I just wanted to kind of go through a little bit of a summary of some of his important points. And you know, I mean, to begin with, he calls it a pandemonium of images, and he spells, you know, pan means everything, you know, and he spells it as daemon, not the demon. So he's pandemonium of images, and then it's called Jung's contribution to know thyself. But it's the pandemonium, and a pandemonium is a place of uproar and chaos, you know. And it was first appeared in Dante's Inferno, and it's you know. It's similar, interestingly, to the word pandemic, you know, and it isn't exactly the same, but you know, a pandemic, demos means people, or democracy, you know, is demos. So, you know, pandemic means all people, you know, are affected. Okay, Jordy's here. Okay, here. So anyway, hi, Jordy. We're just getting started here. Just talking about the pandemonium of the images and how it's somewhat related to pandemic a little bit, but it's just interesting that Hillman spells it as the pandemonium of images, and his first section is about Jung's daemons, you know, and he says that you know, his the chapter of Know Thyself, it was that it wasn't exactly Jung's name for it, but it was the last chapter of the last major work that he wrote, which was Mysterium, and it was called Know. I mean, he's calling it Know Thyself. But the interesting thing is, what is there to know, and who's the self that you want to know, you know. So that's an interesting point, and that's what he's going to go into, because it's not what we think, you know. And he says that Jung gave us each a method by which we may respond to the question of self-knowledge, and he got it really from his deluge of images that he had in 1913 to 1916, just before World War I, which, by the way, is called the Great Break. I mean, if you look at the world before 1914 and you look at the world after 1914, they're not comparable. I mean, before 1914 was a very rational, materialist, mechanistic, industrial revolution type of existence, and Victorian, too, where everything, was just so. I mean, there wasn't really a lot of mystery. There seemed to be a lot of at that point leading up to there, a lot of communications with the dead, seances and stuff that actually happened during the Civil War too. Before the Civil War, in the United States, there was seemed to be a lot of communications with the dead. And hi, Elizabeth. And Jung's family, the Price works, his mother's family, were all fabulous mediums. His grandfather, his mother, his cousin Elaine, and actually the two sisters of Jung's aunts were fabulous mediums. Go ahead, Jordy. Or were you? I thought you were raising your hand. Okay, well, never mind. Okay. Anyway, so that's where it all started. It was a crisis of fate. These images that came to Jung. I mean, because they happened both, and you remember after 1914, you had Einstein, James Joyce, Hemingway, William Butler Yeats was before that, Picasso, Charles Clay, Bertolt Brecht, Brancusi. I mean, the whole art world and the whole music world and literature and science, Einstein and Niels Bohr and theory of relativity. I mean, it was just an incredible revolution. So it was a very important cultural point. Are you raising your hand, Jordy? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I just thought you were, but don't. Yeah.
Smoking. I am keeping my cigarette out of
Okay. Yes. All right. That's fine. But just break in. You don't really have to raise your hand if you don't want to. Okay. So I won't pay any attention. But anyway, and Hillman says that when he got all these images, which were somewhat similar to a psychosis, I mean, they were just so many of them, and there was just such a deluge that his salute, because he'd also broken with Freud at that point. So he had, and then he quit his professorship at the, and he quit the being head of the psychological, I think, journal. He was the head of the journal, and the idea, I think, was that he knew this world wasn't for him. There was something else he needed to do, and because he knew that his path was through the soul and not through the intellect. I mean, he at least sensed it. One of his first questions in the Red Book, "Oh, my soul, where are you? Come to me." I mean, that was sort of his, and he had these visions, all the time, but his actual starting of active imagination was a great effort. And it took him a long time until one time he just felt he dropped. And that was when he fell in and saw the, the scarab, the Siegfried, who was wounded, floating by, and then a underground sun that was being attacked by snakes. hundreds of snakes, and then it suddenly gushes with blood. You know, that was one of his first active imaginations. But anyway, so for healing, he didn't turn to work, family, or naming it. You know, I mean, you know, if you can name something, you supposedly have power over it. You know, that's what the whole fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin is about. You know, if you can name this unknown thing, then it disappears. You know, but he didn't. He turned to his image, and so, then he entered to heal himself a uh, interior drama full of images. This was the healing message, and what we're getting to here is really what images are. You know, what are images? Because he found out that this was his way to healing, and it actually later became his vocation. You know, the images were his vocation. You know, and he wasn't the only one that was discovering this at this time either.
Greg,
Yes.
was it Dr. Jung's actual first experience with active imagination when he was a child? It is
Sitting on the stone.
no, it's recounted in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections that when he was a child, he was walking up a staircase at one of his aunts, and there was a
Yes.
wall, and he looked at the painting and imagined it, and it was as if the figures on the painting were moving.
Yes. That was an unconscious act of imagination, because his aunt told him that he was wrong, that the it was actually her father was not standing outside down at the church. And you know, so yeah, it was not really an act of imagination. And of course, you know, we also tried to find out what is it that I do when I do it that time doesn't seem to pass. And he remembered it was building stones, and so he started to do this work to try to I mean, he was trying everything he could to heal himself internally. And that was when all these childhood dreams came back to him. You know, the one of the altar, when he found a red stone that was shaped like a triangle, and he was going to put it in his little house. That was when the dream of the underground altar with the phallus on it, you know, came back to him. You know, so but I mean, his actual real attempts to have waking dreams, you know, was not easy. If you hear him describe it, it took him a while to actually train this ego mind that shuts everything out and obstructs everything to be open. Although he was so permeable anyway. I mean, he was having, like Lewis was describing, he's had, you know, myriads of experiences like that, plus just the active visions that he had before World War One.
Among your the images that you have created, you have one where there's a image of a sculpture or a face, and the caption says something to the effect, if you look at the figure or the god long enough, it nods.
Yes, that was
The
really.
reason that it nods is because you've been meditating upon it, and it takes it begins to move within your mind.
Yeah, you animate it. I mean,
Yes,
this is the whole idea of animating an image in alchemy. When they're talking about the fire or the heat, the alchemical heat, that's ego attention being applied to an image. You warm it up and it becomes animated, it becomes alive. And this is one of the most important things, and Hillman will say this, is Jung's daemons are alive, and they became, instead of him going to groups for knowledge, or to colleagues for knowledge, or to have a counselor himself. His counselors became Salome, the black snake, Elijah, and Philemon. You know, these are the people, these are the inner figures that he was going to for his, they were his analysts. They were his inner analysts, you know, and really to create this balance within himself, you know. So and anyway, he through these personal figures who became personifications of from the images. He took these images and their personification became his mature fate. One very important dream that Hillman mentions is that Jung had was the dream of the dove maiden. When she spoke to him, you know, she came and flew in. This white bird flies in to some kind of almost like one of these open Greek temples with a table it's an emerald table, and the emerald tablets of Hermes Trismegistus. He didn't think of that at the time, but the dove flies in, and then it turns into a little girl and goes and plays with his children. And at the end, it comes back and hugs him, you know, and he's saying this was his first experience of the anima. And it tells him that she can only become human when the male dove is busy with the 12 dead, you know. So when the male dove is busy with the 12 dead, she can come and visit. And anyway, that was a very important dream for him as well. And so anyway, this is how he found his vocation, you know, his sense of personality, and so now we're talking about know thyself. Know thyself means to become familiar with, to open oneself up to listen to know, and to discover daemons. Now this is the method of active imagination, you know, and this is the method of that's what Hillman is talking about here. So you enter their interior story, and he says to do this, he says, takes the courage of one who sits down and decides to write a novel. You know, if you sit down and write, he says it's the same courage to go in and enter these interior dramas with what he called daemons, you know. And a daemon is a middle figure, you know. It's not human and it's not a god, and it represents an energy. It is the personification of some energy or an art. And Jung says the words daemon and archetype are interchangeable. They're the same thing. So the daemon is the personification of an archetype. And in fact, it wasn't he that said this, but he got it from a daemon told Socrates, says, Eros, my dear Socrates, is a mighty daemon, you know. And so this was the spirit of feminine relatedness was a daemon. And now a daemon is something you can speak with and have a conversation with and a dialogue with, and it's a neutral being. It's not good and it's not evil, you know, but it's almost like, but they are very tangible. So now, as we're getting into this, yes, yeah, go ahead, Jordi.
Well, in my experience with daemon, sometimes there is a confusion, because in other fields of study, anthropology and religious studies, it overlaps with numinous.
Mm-hmm.
That is, it has a charge of overwhelming type of energy that shatters you somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And Jung uses daemon, as you said, as the face of an archetype.
Right.
And it's an
And the voice.
the voice as not an archetypical image, as a subject of archetypical characteristics inside your mind somehow.
Mhm. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's interesting to me because in some ways I feel like coming to face with an archetype is kind of a shattering experience. So maybe, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it possesses you, you know, in the case of I mean, if you're possessed by an archetype, then you really haven't personified the archetype yet, you know, and the idea is to exercise the possession by an archetype, you need to create a distance to it. And the way you create a distance to it is you give it a face and then you speak with it. And at that point, you have exercised this possession. And see, now this is actually, this is why it's so healing. The daemons are so healing, is because if you have any possession, you know, like whether it's a health problem or any kind of problem that you just, or just anger, you know, just unbelievable anger. Anger is a mighty daemon. Okay, draw a picture of the anger, set it over here, you know, and say that's anger, or that's my anger over there, but I'm over here. You know, I mean, it's the whole idea is the whole world of the psyche is alive, and you can speak to these energies. You know, libido expresses itself in an image. An image is a daemon that you can speak with, and psyche is images. You know, this is what Jung actually says, that another word for psyche is images. You know, and images. Go ahead, Stuart.
Right. I'm just thinking that if in that image, the image that creates in my mind is that we're the dead end of the stick. It's the aliveness at the far end, but we're the dead end sometimes. On, you know, based on what Patrick was saying there as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, which team are we playing for?
Yeah,
You know,
who's thinking who? What isn't that? How did he put it? Who's how did he put that? Maybe Gary remembers or something. Yeah.
Gary, what you just said, I think it's crucial.
Mm-hmm.
It's the coconut of the fruit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Of what we're doing here, to not de-energize, to bullfight, so to speak, or to the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Just I am underlining what you've said.
Yes. Well, and you know, the difference between a daemon and a demon
it's
is
important.
the demon is no daemon. The demon is the ego that has cut itself off from the daemons. When we cut ourselves off from the images, and we cut ourselves off from the daemons, which are not us, by the way, they're absolutely not our consciousness. And I when I'm speaking of ego, Jordy, you know, really what I'm speaking of is this conscious awareness that speaks rat-a-tat-tat and does things willfully, sometimes to not its own best interest. And that when we are cut off from the images, when we're cut off from our source, then you will experience demons. But the daemons are not, and demons are demonic, you know, but they are related to some, to our, us being cut off from the images. Because if you have a relationship with the images, you're not going to experience demons. You're going to, that's not going, I mean, at least you're going to exorcise those, exorcise those, you know. So anyway, then, I mean, there's a lot more here, and, you know, it's so rich. I mean, I had to go through this several times, but there's a lot of points here that I just want to, you know, they're so beautiful. I think it's a good idea to go through them, you know. And daemons are figures of the middle realm, and this is a very important point, they are immanent divine figures. They are divine figures that we meet here and now and speak to us from our point of where we are right now. They are not transcendent. So they represent not spirit, but soul. So what Jung is, the world of Jungian healing is the world of the soul, not the world of spirit. And this is something Hillman goes through, what the Nicene Creed did and the Council of Nicaea did, is they said there's God, spirit, and world, and nothing in between. They removed the middle realm, which is soul. You know, now soul are the images. This is psyche, you know. So this is the world of the daemons. This is the world of the archetypes. This is the world of connecting, of direct experience, and developing symbol creation, which is really the ancient tradition that existed before the Council of Nicaea. This was before Christianity, but you know, I really do think though that this stark contrast between no soul, there's only spirit and matter, was necessary for the development of ego consciousness. But at the same time, it was it created demons, because you know, it cut us off from the images. And you know, that was one thing that they were arguing about, was whether we're going to whether an image only represents the divine, or whether the image actually resides in it, the divine. Now Jung would say the latter. The image is not a representation. The image is complete in itself, and it's because you can talk with it. You know, it's something you can discuss with. And this is the whole idea of active imagination, you know, is that we are going to have a vis-a-vis with that, you know, and it's an equal vis-a-vis, you know, is where you don't worship the image, you're in service to it, you know, by having conversations with it. And he says later that there's an ethical claim, and we'll go through what that means, the ethical claim. So, you know, if you go and take a bunch of LSD and have a bunch of images come up and hallucinations and stuff, and then say, wow, man, that was really a acid trip, you know, there's no, that's not the idea of Jung. Is the idea is that these images were given to you, you know, natural, through nature, and then they have an ethical claim on you. And so we need to talk, what is the ethical claim? So anyway, the daemons are the figures of the middle realm, you know, and so this is going to be relating to Hermes, who's, you know, who is the god of the lower worlds. You know, he's the he's also a figure of the middle realms, and everything in here is a mediating force between our lives and an invisible world. The daemons, the archetypes, alchemy, Hermes, the anima are the mediatrix, and they're the middle realm, you know, that exists at between oneness, where nothing can happen, and it's all latent potentiality. Then you have this middle realm, which is actual potentiality of the latent potentiality. And then you have us. Are we going to listen to it or not? Are we going to interact with it or not? Are we going to live out here all the time? Or are we going to have this dialogue with the actual potentiality of oneness, which can only exist in the middle realm. Because if you go into the world of unity, it's the world of the black hole. Everything disintegrates. So there is no consciousness. The only way you can have consciousness is through two, and so the ego, the only way that so here's the crucial question. Are we sitting here going to have a dialogue with this middle realm, which is the manifest potentiality of the latent potentiality? And they are in daemons. And there's nothing about them that's good or evil. They are just representing an archetype. And an archetype is the explosion of oneness into many things. And there's so many of them. There is Aphrodite, there is Mars, there is Apollo. I mean, he'll go through some of these energies that come up, and they all have different voices. There's a myriad of them, but they're all interconnected, though, because they all have access to the same source. I mean, that's what they say about the anima. That the anima has a very intimate friend with whom she confides in always, and that's the self. That's oneness. So she has access to the oneness, and she is our soul. She's born with us, and she exists with us. And women have souls too. And in fact, anytime women are souls, men are unconscious of their feminine side. The soul is feminine. Okay, so women are more conscious of their souls than men are. The soul life, the heart life, the life of Hillman describes it so wonderfully. One thing that we might want to do sometime is read. There's a chapter in Senex and Puer where Jung, and there's several of them, where he describes the differences between soul and spirit, because soulfulness exists in the valleys, where the flowers bloom and the rivers run like slow syrup, and they're rich with nature, and the spirit exists on all by itself, far removed from that world, up on the high mountains, and it's he says it's humorless, where the soul is full of humor, and she's because she's more human. Go ahead, Stuart.
Greg, yeah, just on that subject, an image that I have that I like that brings clarity for me is to figure in the astrology chart, our natal astrology chart, and in relation to how much communication we have within ourselves to the inner world. And then what we do in our life is really a follow on from that point of entry. So we can do all the thinking, sensing, feeling, or intuiting that we want, but really our entry into this world, the astrological alignments determine, if you like, to some extent, our connection with soul. Not so much the thinking that we do afterwards. I think fundamentally it's our connection into the world that predetermines, and then development comes after that. Anyway, it works for me. So.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you get into this, and what the images really are soul. They have a feminine aspect to them. Spirit is more logos. And one thing Hillman says is that that logos is created, is something that differentiates and separates. And he says, so it's created by hate and strife. So in other words, the idea of the logos, which is the thing that's separated from the feminine, is created by strife. And that what he meant really is it separates and divides, you know. So, I mean, he was using some emotive words to describe it, but it's illustrative too of the difference between soul and spirit. And, you know, by reading this, I wanted to know more about the difference between soul and spirit. I started to read that, chapter in the prayer, in the puer, you know. So anyway, so this world was called in Greek the metaxy. It's the middle realm, metaxy. And so psychic reality is the middle ground. And it speaks mythologically. It speaks in images. And imaginal figures are poetic, dramatic, and literary in nature. That's the daemon world. This is the world of the soul. And so it's the spirit is a much more stark place. Now, this is not to badmouth spirit, because spirit comes into play later, but soul has to be given its full honor, you know, and not because it's the Council of Nicaea and modern philosophy tried to obliterate it. I mean, that's what he says when he's going to be talking about Karl Jaspers. He's talking about Karl Jaspers completely understands the problem, but he's on the side of obliterating it. He doesn't, daemonology, he knows what it is all about, but no, we don't need this, and that was because he was on the side of there's God or spirit and the matter, and there's nothing in between. And there is something in between, and that's the daemons, the archetypes, anima, and psychic reality. Psychic reality. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not entirely certain that it's accurate to assert that at the Nicene Council they eliminated the soul.
He said they eliminated the images. He said actually the Imagist group won at the Council of Nicaea. But he says, actually, if you read what Hillman says, he says, yes, they won a Pyrrhic victory because the iconoclasts were the ones that actually won. And these were the Byzantine soldiers who went in destroying statues, destroying icons, destroying images everywhere, and the only people who were saving the images who, if you look at him long enough, they'll nod, were the women. In fact, the one who called the Council of Nicaea was an empress who represented the Imagist faction at the Council of Nicaea, which actually lasted, there were 12 sessions, and it started in 787, and I think the last one was in 869. So it was like an 82-year discussion, but what did you say again, Louis? Can you just repeat what you said? Because I want to.
Well, I'm just not certain that if the assertion is that the Ante-Nicene Council eliminated the soul, or even
No, I'm sorry, that was a little bit strong. That was not what the Council of Nicaea did. Okay, because what the Council of Nicaea, he said that what actually came out of the Council of Nicaea, and it was not a conscious decision, was that the images, he talks about latria and dulia. Latria is an adoration that of a figure that is only available to the Trinity. So you can only adore images that relate to God, the Son of God, and the mediator, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. So, but for what they said at the end was, yeah, we don't need to destroy the images, but you only honor them. You don't be in service to them. And then what Hillman says is when you are making the images now not animated living entities, and just say, no, they just represent, they're supposed to represent a metaphysical fact. They're not alive themselves. He says, then they killed the images. And when they killed the images, they killed the daemons. And when they killed the daemons, they killed the anima. So, I mean, he was, sort of, drawing that out, the implications of what the Council of Nicaea was. But it was not, you are correct, absolutely correct, Louis. They did not say anything about eliminating the soul. But he said that that was the net effect of that we enter a world of where there's rational materialism. And that if you just look at the Piscean age, the first 1,000 years is the vertical fish. This is the fish where the upper world and the lower world are almost in direct communication. And then around 1100 AD or so, suddenly the world of the horizontal fish takes over. And this is just following the Council of Nicaea. And this is where the psychic world is now horizontal. It's the age of discovery. It's the age of the Reformation, the Renaissance, and it's the age of that's 500 miles wide and 2 inches deep. But it really, the second age of Pisces, which was supposed to also Pisces, which was supposed to be the age of the Antichrist, what it means really is it's the age of the anti-self. That means you're entering a more materialistic.
Craig.
Yes, go ahead.
So what I'm thinking is the Council of Nicaea, as you modified it, essentially said we need to put a stop to the worshiping of soul.
Of images.
Worship to me, and a worship of images, and worship from the definition that I've learned is the sort of the celebration, the worship part of the service at church is, as I understand it, is when the music and the singing starts and the band plays. So what we're doing here is actually we're celebrating the soul. And if indeed we were to say, let's form this men's group in some church, we would probably get thrown out because that attitude of let's not have any soul worship, let's not have Jung, and all that we're talking about is probably very frowned upon in a lot of churches. Not necessarily all, but anyway, any thoughts on that?
Well, he goes on to say, just to kind of finish up what he was saying, is the idea of you adoring an image is idolatry, is what was the opinion. This is idolatry. And
because, for example, talking about images starting to move, I was taken back in my memory as being a little boy in my parents' bedroom, which I sometimes would, crawl in and to sleep in their bed. And there's a picture that they had of the Blue Boy. And I don't forget who the painter is, but I remember
Gainsborough.
Gainsborough. I remember seeing the Blue Boy walking, heading down the path. And I often thought, I want to see that again. And I couldn't.
Well, you did it. You accomplished it. Jung had a artist come to him one time who he couldn't get to do active imagination, just kept failing. But, Jung, when you got to, the only way you could get to his house was via a train. And then you had to walk about 20 minutes to get to his house on 228 Seestrasse from the train station. So anyway, this guy had a lot of time sitting in train stations waiting for the train to come, because its schedule didn't match his Jung schedule. And so he stares at this image of a resort in Switzerland. And pretty soon, he'd been there so many times looking at it, he actually says, well, I'm going to walk up that path. He walks up the path, and then he comes over the hill, and there's a little chapel down there. And he goes in to the door of the chapel's open. He walks in, and he suddenly sees some animals scurrying behind the altar, and it so startled him he woke up, and the image stopped. So he said, next time I'm going to see what but I mean, that's exactly what he did. He animated an image by looking at it. But what Hillman says about idolatry, which was what being in service to an image, they accused someone who was in service to an image and thought the image had its own life and could be animated. You know, even though the image initially comes in the psyche, and then to honor its beauty and its importance to you, you create an outer image for it, which has numinous energy. You know, the fact that this image is animated. Numinous, the original word, means the other beckons.
Mhm.
Come here, come hither. Yes.
Just, I would like to discuss the issue of the number one, etc., but perhaps for the last 10 minutes of the meeting.
Oh, yes. We'll stop. We'll stop in about maybe about 20 minutes, okay? And then just open it up, okay?
Now, just a couple of precisions concerning Nicaea and Hillman's.
Okay, well, yeah. Now, I am not claiming to be an expert on Nicaea.
I am trying to add, things that
Yes, well, we can definitely discuss the Council of Nicaea, you know,
no,
because
I don't want to do that now. Just to connect, there is latria, dulia, but there is something called hyperdulia,
oh,
which
yes.
is the cult to the Virgin. And
Yes.
a little bit here. And then is the divisive issue of the Paraclete, of the Holy Spirit.
Yes, the Paraclete.
Which split Eastern and Western Christianity later on. The God nature of the Holy Spirit, and if it's a messenger, and the whole issue of angels. I think
Yeah, just a second.
that's a structural issue in our tradition. The role of the Virgin, which somehow abduces the feminine, and there is a connection to the soul, or a mirror or something. I mean, my whole point, it's a rather rich subject.
Yes. So we will definitely, I'll just go until about, we'll say 10 after, and then, or maybe 5 after, and then we'll just open it up to everybody. Okay, darn it, my dog's shut. I can't yell at him. Okay, well, anyway, so we're just gonna keep moving on. That's a Chihuahua, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so anyway, psychic reality is the middle ground, and it speaks mythologically. And, you know, the imaginal figures are these poetic, dramatic, literary in nature. And it goes on within us, not without us, this psychic reality. Psychic reality is life in soul, life in the imagination. And the third realm is the soul. So it's not matter, it's not spirit. That's why it's the middle ground. You know, it's the third realm. And to heal himself, Jung had to reestablish a relationship with this third realm, which was his separation from it. He knew was his sickness, you know. So and the third realm is the realm as the as if, the as though, you know, and that's the realm of the daemons. And the daemons are very, very real. They have voices. When if you really can develop your ability to do a meditation in an active imagination sense, where you can, you know, I think this is the second exercise in ally work, where you imagine you're the other, and then you speak to yourself, and pretty soon that voice that's speaking to yourself, you know, is not you. You know, I mean, that's the idea of awakening in alchemy, is to free the divine that's trapped in body. And that's the divine that's trapped in body are these daemons, that have their own voices and they can speak to us, and they're neither real nor unreal. They're, remember Huldra's back, I mean, she's this Swedish nymph that lives in the forests that lures loggers deep into the forest with her beautiful face, and then as soon as she gets them where they can't possibly find their way out, she turns and her back is invisible. So that's the idea of the daemon, that their backs are invisible. And a woman had an interesting dream about this when Jung died. She was at a party and Jung was there, and a bunch of other Jungians were there, and they were all wearing green and black suits. They were green on the front, blessed greenness, and the back was completely black. And then so she saw Jung there. He was wearing that suit, and when then she saw there was a black wall, and there was a outline in the black wall that was shaped exactly like Jung, and he walks up and moves into that outline, and then you couldn't see him anymore. And Marie-Louise von Franz says that's what happens to us when we die. She says we enter basically what is, at least for most of us, as far as our access to that realm, is a black hole. It has an event horizon where light can't escape. Now, that's not true for everyone. Some people have access to that realm, through some great gift of theirs. So anyway, soul and daemon imply each other and require each other. So this middle realm and this third realm consists of the soul and the daemons. And Hillman says that soul and daemon imply and require each other. So soul needs daemon, daemon needs soul. Now I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it's seems kind of compelling, even though I don't know what it means. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, because for various reasons, including things that don't go on in this meeting, I'm just wondering, and this may be somewhat of an inflammatory question, but to what extent do you think that the way we're approaching things and the Jungian approach and all that stuff, to what extent do you think it's maybe male dominated, or it's like an attempt of men to like reconnect to the sacred feminine within themselves? I mean, it sort of got triggered a little bit, and I know it was a mistake when Miles said, men's group, because he didn't see the women, who are here. But still, I still have this kind of impression from a cultural standpoint that there's this like marginalization of the feminine.
Well,
specifically,
most of Jung's followers were women, and one of them was Liliane Fry Rohn, and both Emma Jung and she wrote a book called Animus and Anima, and she was an analyst. And of course, there was Marie-Louise von Franz and Tony Wolff and Carrie Baines and Esther Harding, and then
there was also Dr. Jung's full-throated endorsement of the papal doctrine in the 1950s of the Assumption of Mary.
Yeah, well, and that was it was to him an image of the Trinity becoming a quaternity. But the idea here is especially if you are a man, you're very unconscious of the feminine side. So your soul is very far from you. If you're a woman, you are closer to the feminine consciousness. So the soul is closer to you and more of a partner to you. But what now this is we're speaking archetypally, so we're not speaking culturally here. This has nothing to do with living beings. It's the structure of the psyche, and Jung, is outlining this structure. He's not outlining culture. Okay, so what we're talking about is that diagram of the archetypal feminine has nothing to do with women. I mean, the Earth Mother and the Great Mother and the Negative Mother and the transformational anima and everything. That means we happen to be these crazy forms of life that one side is male and the other side is female, and the one side that's male needs to have a male consciousness in order to be a male, and the female needs to have a female consciousness in order to be a female. In other words, to have the biological process take place. Now if you're anyway, I can't. That I always get in big trouble when I start talking about this stuff. So let me say your point's well taken, Adam, but let's just keep going with it, But the idea, what Liliane Frey-Rohn said, that Jung was missing to a great extent, even though he talks about it all the time, is the spirit of love, that he needed to, that as a woman, she said, that the one thing he found missing in it was a more, there was a compelling emphasis for the spirit of love, which she found not lacking, but not having the honor or the emphasis that it required, and that's what Marie-Louise von Franz said too about some of the male figures around Jung, especially C.A. Meyer. She and him were in a big fight. What she said about him, he was way too intellectual, and she said, "Where's the anima? Where's the soul in C.A. Meyer or his works?" She thought it was missing. But anyway, this is very important. If we go, I'm not discounting cultural issues, but if you go into them, you're going into a sticky swamp, because it creates. One thing Edward Edinger said when he was discussing all these, trying to discuss the psyche, he said that one thing he would never bring up at anything, and he was very adamant about, is any ism. He says, anytime I mention an ism of any kind, that's a capitalism or fundamentalism or any conceptual ideation. He says it immediately, and this is speaking to the daemons, it immediately releases a poison into the room that you can't get rid of. So, that's why I say we might want to stick to the objective psyche, even though I fully agree with what you're saying, and it is an important discussion. But why don't we table it for now? We can talk about it maybe in the last 20 minutes if you want, but let's try to stick with the remember, we've got the world over here, this world of unity. We have the middle realm, which is where this potentiality of the unity world is suddenly exploded, and yet it's still not in the physical world. It's the realm of soul. It's the third realm. Now again, the critical question is this us going to have a dialogue with this middle realm, or is it we can live its whole life as a willful it, ignoring the world of this middle realm? That's what Hillman is discussing about the importance of the imaginal world, the world of psychic reality, the world of the soul, this third realm. Are we going to have a relationship with it or not? That's the question that's facing us, you know. So anyway, then he talks about introspection a little bit. He talks about, here's what he talks about in the rest of the thing. I want to keep an eye on the time here, so we have time for discussion. He discusses, you know, the daemons. Then he discusses what introspection has been historically. Then he discusses this wonderful outline of a great opponent of the daemon, Karl Jaspers, brings up, who understands the daemon completely, but comes up with an argument that he says it needs to be repressed. We need to get rid of it, you know. And then he responds to it, but he says it's such a powerful argument, and Jaspers understands it better than anybody. So let's listen to him. And then he talks about, in the final section, you know, he's going to talk about the claim of the images and spirit versus soul, and and the aesthetic thing, and then he'll discuss the Council of Nicaea, you know, which is really imagism, the imagist faction, the ones that say the images are alive and we need to speak to them. And then the iconoclast faction that says, no, they're not. The only thing that's living is a transcendent spirit that is not in this world, that is outside of this world. And these are only dead representations of that world. So that's where spirit totally represses soul and the daemons, you know. And go ahead. Somebody.
Yeah, I was just one question. I don't know if it's the right timing, but like, for example, like there is some objectivity to repression of the feminine. You know, if you repress the feminine, it will haunt you. You know, that's the objectivity of the psyche in dreams. And I was thinking, if we can, is there any way to establish the objectivity in terms of symptoms? Like, if you repress the feminine, you will have haunted males in your dream. You know, because the male psyche is sort of androgynous. But let's say, for example, if we do repress our connection with the images as such, is there any symptoms of that? Like, what is there?
It's a disease. It's the disease of literalism, is what Hillman calls it. When you don't have the relationship with the images, he says you're suffering from the modern disease of literalism. And, you know, talk about you know, when Jung, before he started doing this, you know, he says the only way, he says in the Red Book that the only way you can become fully human is to touch bottom. And he also says that when you have touched bottom, you find out that it sways back and forth. You know? But anyway, when you touch bottom, then now you are ready for the imagist life. I think sometimes, you know, this ego and this middle realm, and then these three worlds, you know, the us in the world of banality, the world of sober science. And at the end, you know, Hillman's going to put in a good word for sober science, because Jung was going to use sober science to, he said, if you got too involved in the images, you have an inflation. So you need sober science to bring you back to the earth, you know, so that you can, so that the, you know, Hermes says its strength is perfected when it returns to the earth. You know, if you're going to live in the imagist universe, you're living in the world of albedo. You're living in whiteness. So that's pretty much the same as living in the world of just, you know, the one-pointed whiteness, or you know, it's somewhat like the Hindus who become a burnt string, you know, where you blow on it and it goes away, you know.
So what do you think he meant by touching bottom?
By touching bottom, it means that the ego needs, or the conscious attitude, I don't care what you call it, the conscious attitude needs to experience usually a shattering defeat before it can, before it's willing, knows that it has a disease, and it's absolutely imperative that it has a dialogue with the realm of the soul and with these daemons. When everything's going right, it doesn't need to. Go ahead, Stuart.
I think touching bottom means bringing it back into this moment, into now, being here now, and having all of the images and the introspection and the knowledge of even what Hillman writes about, which is dead images in a sense, is to be able to relate it all back to what's going on for me right now. And this being the base, this moment in time being the base of my life. Because I think we're not to forget that even though we're in this myth, we're also myth making. We're creating the myth, we're evolving, we are the evolution of the myth. And we can look at it from our own perspective, or we can look at it from the perspective of we are the daemon living. So I think there's two perspectives always within, many perspectives within these things. But to bring it back to now is not to get lost in the knowledge, and also not to get lost in the image either, but to keep it alive in this moment so that it can evolve freely, not according to its own pattern, or become dead in itself.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
So,
I just want to add, and then Stuart or Adam, go ahead. Is the idea here too? Is this willful conscious attitude needs sometimes a shattering defeat before it's willing to do this, and at that point, when it's like if you have a near-death experience, sometimes the ego has experienced death, and so it knows what it's like to be dead, and so now it has this live, and when you talked about, and bottom too is bis, BYSS, and abyss means bottomless, and so when I mean the idea was Jung touched bottom, and until he touched bottom, until he hit he got to the point which all our dreams tell us, and which all the fairy tales tell us, is the ego can't help you now. In other words, rational materialism is not going to solve this problem. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, thanks. No, I find what we're discussing very rich, and I kind of also wanted to address what Kevin asked, because it has to do with me bringing in this topic, which is delicate, because I think one of the things that may happen, speaking from my own experience, is that the things that I repress, I project. So, I think it's important for me personally to look at what happens culturally speaking, as far as interactions between men and women in the culture, because I think it's, in a way, it's an expression of a collective phenomenon in which we're participating. So,
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. It is an important topic. I think before we get there, though, it's kind of good to have the background of it, because it's like I say, I'm not saying I agree with everything you're saying, not contradicting anything you're saying, but it can, you don't want to release a poison into the room. I mean, we want to put light on issues and don't bring heat. And sometimes that does tend to bring a little heat, especially when we're just trying to get the background of what Hillman is saying. But let me just take 2 more minutes, and then we're going to just go around the room, okay? So we'll just finish with an introspection, a couple things next time. But he says if he's talking about introspection and the many, many ways of introspection. How do we know thyself? And when he's talking about know thyself, what does he mean? Because we're going to find out it's not what we think when we think know thyself. You know, he says, if we want to know ourselves, how do we proceed? You know, he says it's usually through an images, but he says, is it the detached Apollonian? Is it the abstracted Saturnarian? Is it Aphrodite, the goddess of love? Is it the god of Dionysus of release? Is it the god of heroic deeds? Or is it Hephaestian artifacts? He calls it. That means, you know, Alexander's partner, who, you know, possibly his lover, was named Hephaestus, and everybody's been looking for his tomb, and someone, I guess, finally thinks they found it. But anyway, and then his introspection, he says, here's some of the people who have defined it for us: Plato, Socrates, St. Augustine, Descartes, Locke, Hume, Rousseau, you know. And so he's saying is know thyself mean only know rational consciousness? And he says, well, that's solipsism, you know, that you can't know anything more than what is the personal consciousness. And then he says, is it only private thinking, only my willing ego or willing libido, or is it my memories, you know? And is it all just the investigation of the tonalities of ego consciousness? And he says, is it the depths? Is it anxiety? Is it my anxiety? Is it my guilt? Is it my hopelessness? Is it my, he says, those are all abstractions shorn of imagery, he says, those words, you know, and they have no relationship to what lies behind anxiety, guilt, hopelessness, you know. And he says, what can one introspect the bottom of despair? He says, what's the source of an anxiety? And he says, writers know, he says, that they can't introspect their characters. The scenes come of themselves. The figures walk in and out, almost without the author even knowing what's happening. And so he says, the imaginal is not introspection, but it's accepting of the reality of inner figures and realizing that we are not their author. So that's what he's saying. This is about this type of know thyself, you know. And he says, in a sentence, and I'll kind of finish with this. In a sentence, he says, what's important is not the subject of the sentence, it's the verb. It's what he says, the active imagination is the verb, you know. It's the image, it's the activated image, because what is it going to do? It's not the static. And, you know, here Jung says one place that that eros is dynamic images, moving images, soul, and logos is static images, you know, that is spirit. You know, so spirit is static images and soul is moving, dynamic, living, animated images. Okay, well, we'll finish up with the rest of it later. So why don't we just go around the room? Gary, you haven't talked. What would you like to add to this? And we'll go back to Adam and Kevin, but why don't we just get some of the people who haven't said anything? Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm kind of just deep in thought about this. This was a really good talk. So I think I'll probably come in with something a little later, but I'm going to pass.
Okay. All right. Sure. Louis, do you have anything? Or
Not right now.
okay. How about you, Tim? And we'll come back to all the rest of you. I just wanted to hear some of the people didn't say anything.
Yeah, I find this really rich. And one thing that I'm thinking about, especially in response to Adam and what you just read about the only person or the only way a person has access is through their own ego consciousness. It seems to me that, I don't know who it was that said artists are the antenna of the world, and I oftentimes feel like I am channeling a kind of collective energy. And I think in response to Adam, one of the things I'm feeling is that we are, as a group, channeling a kind of collective energy that is beyond our own individual experience. And I don't know how to articulate this in terms of the gender divide, but I think women have their feet on the ground a little better, as Stuart was saying. And so maybe their attention is on a different part of the whole process. It seems like the reason there's so many men attracted to this is because this seems to be right at the vitality of our individual lives. And I feel like collectively, it's sort of more broad. This is a long conversation that's been going on for centuries, and we're trying to change the subject ever so slightly. And I think that's more what women are plugged into. I've been following Jan's additions on the chat here, and I find that very compelling. And maybe it's because I'm so plugged into the Eros, but it's really hard to articulate this stuff. There's a real richness that I feel that I cannot put my finger on, that has to do with kind of, as a man, I feel like it's rising up into coming alive by engaging more of what our bodies are telling us about the world we live in. So
I think we can do dialogues with an image on this too, and try to get some guidance.
I'm scribbling as we're doing this, and just doing these images that are kind of subjectless. This is beautiful. This is just about a feeling, and the actual subject doesn't make any difference. I'm trying to get at a kind of feeling that I'm bringing up out of the depths.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, yeah, we'll. I think we'll finish this next time, but it is rich, and I think if we really want to describe or understand the imaginal world and why it's so important to have a dialogue with it, and why it's alive, and it really is where Jung is saying it's psychic reality, it's soul, it's anima, it's daemons, it's archetypes, they're all the same thing, and there's myriads of them, and they're all interconnected, and that's what we need to have a dialogue with. Each one has its own voice. Why don't we hear from Charles and Elizabeth and Jan, and then we'll just start around and go around again with everybody. Charles, do you have anything?
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to say about just quick throw in when we were talking about the Council of Nicaea and the kind of more image faction versus the other. It just all kind of, the idea that comes to me is that the idea of the church not necessarily believing in the just regular individual person to be able to have deep religious experiences, that there is this cutoff from that personal world of soul, and that there's heaven and earth and nothing else, and any sort of connection to the divine or whatever has to almost be bestowed onto the individual from above. And just, I don't know, I feel like it really ties into the idea that the lack of belief in the individual to have their own personal religious experiences, and that has to be that's delegated to like the priest figure or whatever.
Not a prophet, not a shaman,
Right.
but a priest. You know, the one who, and Jung said it was, I'm not Jung, but Hillman says that was the end of individual symbol creation. I mean, that was what they were trying to do away with. You know, the iconoclasts, the ones who want to destroy the images that were animated, or just say that they didn't represent anything. They were dead, you know.
Well, it should also be pointed out that Dr. Jung had a very great respect for the church.
Yes.
A personal blessing from Pope Pius that he, in psychology and religion, he went to great lengths to show the beauty and the profound symbolism of the Holy Communion and the Mass, and stated that the Mass was the highest form of individuation as expressed in ritual. And it certainly isn't true that the individual is left out of the church. It would not have lasted 2,000 years with billions upon billions of individuals. It would not be the basis of so much of our cultural arts and of our laws. We're just simply in an age, or entering an age of the Antichrist, where our institutions, whether they're religious or political or artistic, are just broken down. We see this in modern art, in music, in our political institutions, and we see it in the denigration of religion. There are faults with religion and with Christianity and the Catholic Church, but denigrating it isn't the answer. The answer is to build upon the foundation that's already laid. The individual plays a great role in Christianity and in the Roman Catholic Church. That's why you have the sacraments for individuals. And there is no difference between a shaman and a priest or a medicine man. They're all great therapists of the human soul. And that's what I have to say.
I guess I'm just talking from my experience, and that's all I really can speak from.
Yeah, and it's I guess you know, Jung does say one place that he really is the ones he can help the most are not the ones that are within the fold of the church, although you know he worked with plenty of those, but it was the ones who fell out of it. You know, I mean, that he could speak, he could help them out. Elizabeth, what do you have any comments?
No, I'm listening, and a lot of very interesting ideas, and I want to think about that. I cannot say anything for the moment, but I will think about it.
Okay, well
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. But we value your input, and don't worry that
Sure.
you know, anything you say will be, you know, we
Okay.
we
It's
really
the
welcome.
first time I participate, so
Sure.
I was just, I want to listen for the moment.
Okay,
Next time
no
I will
problem.
say.
That's fine. Hillman says that even a stone in the river causes the river to flow around it. So
Sure.
yeah, so we all
I'm a
have
stone.
a
Today I'm a stone.
yes. Okay.
Also,
Jan, how about
Jan-
you? You've been very last
Jan
time
says
you really
she
blew
would
us
rather
away.
write.
Go ahead, Jan.
I think Jen wanted to just participate in writing. She wrote something about. why
Okay,
don't we
Jan,
just
you don't want to participate. That's fine. Okay, well, why don't we start again? Why don't we just open up the floor? Who has something they want to share? Go ahead, Jordy.
You're
Oh,
muted.
wait, you got to unmute. Yeah, unmute yourself. Okay, there we go. Did you here? I'll try to unmute you. Why won't you unmute? Let's see, unmute. All right. How come I can't unmute you, Jordy?
No.
Here. Okay, there you go. Okay, you're open. We can hear you now.
I will put a card on the table, not just for Adam. It's in Spanish. I am trying to. No, well.
I speak Spanish. So.
Oh.
You should-
Hola.
Now.
Okay, you got to go to gallery view, I think, to see this. Okay, there we go. Go ahead. Or
Interesante.
view.
Tony Wolff, Structural Forms of Feminine Psyche.
Yes.
That can be enlightful. It's not a simple thing. The animus in women is not symmetric to the anima in men, etc., etc.,
No.
etc. And it was enlightenment to me, even to enrich the image of the path of individuation and the obstacles to face. Just a suggestion. I'll throw the book and you pick up if you wish. Huh?
Yes, I don't know that that's in English, but there are some Tony.
I know there is a version in English. I have it.
Great.
I can send. I don't know how I can send it to everybody.
Okay,
I will
well,
look for it. If I can, I
if you could just put the title in the chat, I will find it. I'm the bookfinder of all bookfinders. Yeah, just put the English title and I will get it for everybody.
I'll put that in the chat. Now,
yeah.
Something, I have 3 or 4 personal issues that I think are relevant. As Stuart, you mentioned not to get lost. And you mentioned on the rational level, we can say that Karl Jaspers was more rationalist than rational. We are rational. We can choose not to be rationalist. That's true. Now, images, you can get lost in delectation. Is said that in English, of images?
Yeah.
To be a gourmet for images.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So some degree of, I will not say asceticism here, some degree of fortitude is important. Now, I have a problem personally here, which is called liminality. I was exposed to the psychoanalysis when I was quite young. I was 18, and I was joining medical school. And to read Freud was off limits while I was on therapy, which was good for me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as everyone who has participated on some sort of ritual activities, in my case, Francmasonic, you have to open and close and not get lost and not get hung. I think you call it in liminoid. And every time I manage that well with meditation, Vipassana type of meditation. In active imagination, I am fuckingly afraid of getting lost.
Yes.
Of losing grounding.
Yes.
And say tips on the Jungian or post-Jungian elaboration of liminality, I'll appreciate because the anthropological side, Van Gennep and Victor Turner, etc. But that's another issue. Concerning grounding, to me is important because in a way it connects with Earth. It goes through anima, so to speak. It's not on the Jungian tradition. It's more on the Reichian tradition, if you wish. Which brings back to the original point, which is the idea of center. Number one is distracting unless you use missing my word, an orthopedic tool from the Pythagoras, from the Pythagorean tradition.
Yes.
Generally speaking, geometry. Yeah. The idea of geometry. Now you can put the axis from the zenith to the nadir, mm-hmm. and feel the axis going through you. And you connect to the center. And that's, well, I am not dishonoring a promise, but in a Masonic ritual, there are 3 chambers, the master chamber, where there is the darkness visible, and you enter backwards. To open, one of the words used is that, how can we open that? with the blessing of God, etc., and with the help of the center. It's a catechism. And someone asks, what's the center? The center is the central point of a circle, and if man is there, he cannot err. And that
in psychology is called centroversion. You know, it's not introversion or extroversion, but individuation is centroversion.
That's an image, an abstract image, the center, and that there is a center of the circle where you cannot err, and it's not explained. You have to grasp it and deal it with yourself. It has been resonating to me from the last week meeting. I am reconnecting to plenty of things of my past and putting them together and fitting quite well here. So that's making plenty of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the final thing, my daughter, who's now in this moment in chômage, how do you say in English? She's out of work because she works for an airline and they stopped flying. And she's overqualified for that job, etc. 3 days ago, she started painting, which is something she hasn't done in the last 25 years, almost obsessively, and which is healthy for her. And it's connected to me being here. I don't know how. Nor I don't care that much. I mean, I wish her well. I wish her to have the energy to walk her path, and this is it. But things happen. Now, concerning, and that's the last thing, there are other traditions, or modern traditions, or postmodern traditions, dealing with this anima soul, word soul thing. Besides the Native American ones, which come to mind, by the way, the 7 ray of wisdom, I mean the 4, the quadrants, the Zenit Nadir, there is internal ray, I think in some sort of Lakotas, which again resonates with that. I am thinking about the Polynesian traditions, Kahuna, or the postmodern Oponopono, which has something to do. And I don't know if you are aware of some strange German priest named Bertram Hellinger and his family constellation thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I'm sorry, but
I don't want to
I mean, I'm not. I'm not that smart.
I think that's based on Zulu tradition too,
What?
by the way.
Yeah.
I think
Yes.
Hellinger's work is based on some Zulu practices.
Yeah.
Zulu practices, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's allowing yourself to be moved by, say, the general soul. He uses the soul in a very specific term. I don't want to be distracting, but somehow there are local labelings of a more general thing to me. It's the local brand name of the of the matter. So in my case, it's being quite sometimes agitating, but things fit much better together. Again, I have an issue with liminal resistance, as an analyst would say.
Yeah, well, you know, Hillman will address that at the end, where he talks about the difference between stillness and speech. And you know, your deal about the center is that famous definition of the divine, that it's a center, it's a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, Joseph Campbell said that Black Elk actually brought that up when he says he was showing John Neihart the sacred mountain of Lakota, and he says it's Harney Peak in South Dakota is the central mountain of the world. But then he says parenthetically, but he says, but really, the central mountain is everywhere. You know.
Yeah, can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Jordi, I don't know, in Islam, it's more in the Sufism tradition, not so much the other traditions such as Sunni, Shia, and so on. But if you go to Mecca, if you go to Mecca, you know, there's something you have to do once in a lifetime in the Islamic tradition. But from a Sufist explanation is that, you know, going through this Kaaba in Mecca, the square, you know, you have to go through around this 7 times.
Yeah.
And there is a black stone, which according to them is from Adam and so on. But anyway, so for them, it's going around one soul, basically. And going around one soul,
Beautiful.
and there is the central, you can, the circumference, you know, in the middle, there is a point, you know, this, yes, I don't know how to explain it, but there's this point. And so this is the point, is this stone, which is essentially a symbol of the divine, you know, the divine spirit, or Allah, you know, God, or whatever name you
So
want to call it.
beautiful. The
But it's-
whole scene is beautiful. You know,
Yes, but
the whole-
and so many Sunni Muslim and all other Muslim take this sort of not symbolically, you know, you have to go to Sufism to understand it symbolically, and that's why you have the whirling dervishes, you know, the whirling dervishes where they circle around to essentially lose their ego. It's just to sort of
they become a circle.
yes, they
They're-
become the circle.
Okay,
So
yeah.
so God is perfect in that sense, you know. You cannot destroy this perfect yeah, the circle. So that's the center, and the center is in everyone, I guess, you know. That's the essence of everyone. And so to conceptualize it too much, you know, with all this different program, it's fine, you know, it's okay, but by the end of it, someone, you know, once has to circle around themselves. They have to do the, you know, whether the twirling services or any other means, but you know, so the center is already felt, I feel like, you know, for most people. But the thing is that it's too cluttered with different books and concepts.
All right. Well, is anybody else want to?
Yeah, maybe I'll comment
go ahead,
on
Gary.
what Jordy said there, because, you know, he spoke about the need to be able to, you know, pull back, to get grounded when you get into some of this. And I know, you know, I definitely had some of those problems. I get in these weird states where, like, you know, I just barely functional. I wouldn't be able to read anything technical at all. And for me, that image of a donkey, which has got to be about the most grounded animal in the world, you know, he was sort of there in my active imaginations, you know, after a time, and he, you know, would give me that way to kind of keep from getting too weird, you know. And so, you know, I think, you know, I definitely agree with what you're saying, Jordy. We all kind of have to create that way to, you know, maybe it's like the, you know, the science pulling us back to the ground, you know, to kind of, you know, to grasp what it is that we've pulled in, the logos, you know. But yeah, I totally agree with that. You know, you have to be careful. You're muted.
Yeah. Who else wants to has some input? Anybody else? Oh, go ahead, Miles.
Yes, just yesterday, I was listening to a woman, she's American, but she encountered a Sufi guru, I suppose, and has been studying under this Sufi religion for some years. And she said something that was really quite staggering. And that is that as soon as the umbilical cord is severed, we start to forget.
That's the Greek word for truth, is aletheia. You know, it means aletheia means remembering, and means to not remembering. So truth is remembering what we forgot. It's rediscovering. Yeah.
So, and then I was listening to your last week's session in the recording before coming on here. And for some reason, I started to reminisce about a ravine where when I was a little boy, I lived in Edmonton, Alberta, which is about 3 hours north of where I live right now. The nice thing about Edmonton is it is a city of ravines, lots of ravines. And between my house and the school was a ravine with a little creek running through it and a footpath and then a footbridge that you had to cross and then go up the other side to get out of the ravine. And then the school was over there. And I remember, and I was like, I'm still sort of grieving it as I now think about it, but it was a mysterious place to transgress through, and lots of mystery and plants, and you know, the water was always a mysterious thing. And at the end of this ravine, or at the top of the ravine, was actually a very large outfall, is a storm sewer outfall. But to me as a little kid, it was like a mysterious cave. You know, what in earth is this? Where does that lead to? All these mysteries. And then one day, the city decided we have to get rid of this creek. And they just brought in all these earth movers and excavators, and they would have laid a more pipe, and they obliterated the little creek, and you know, pretty much destroyed the ravine as it once was. So anyway, that's where I'm thinking, as a child back then, I was still more connected to source, because, you know, it hadn't been that long previous that I was still connected by the umbilical cord, right? And so that was a place of great sacredness to me. And then I'll just wrap up to think about women, womb men. They still always have the potential. They still have the umbilical cord, the ability to create umbilical cord. And when a woman is pregnant, how she has these cravings, right? She knows that she needs to consume. That's really alchemical, right? Those cravings that the pregnant woman has. So anyway, just we'll summarize to say, yeah, that was a profound concept. And I think us men are, as you said, we are more of into the air, less connected to earth than women.
Anyone else have any closing thoughts?
No, well, Craig, perhaps I might say something.
Yeah, sure.
I missed a little bit there, but for me, in working with Gestalt, I see Gestalt as a great way of how to approach something. So it clarifies the path, if you like. So in relation to this, the active imagination work, or the images from within, they're really a conduit for aliveness. So how do I identify within myself? Do I identify with the image, or do I identify with the aliveness? If I can identify with the aliveness itself, well, then I am straight away in a relationship with the mystery, with the unknowable. It brings me directly to source. If I identify with the image, well, then I'm inherently trying to work with something that's dead. I'm blocking myself from aliveness, and I'll start to look elsewhere. I'll get a bit lost. And probably one of the first places that I would turn to is knowledge. So I may go to a book, or I might read something, or listen to something, but until I go back to that aliveness, I'm going to be lost. If I go to the knowledge, where the knowledge is, unless I see the knowledge as another symbol with aliveness within it, you know, I'm all the time creating false images, false gods to kneel before. So I think for me, it's very clear that I've no interest in these things. I've loads of interest in the mysterious and in the unknowable. So active imagination speaks to me. To say, I straight away have a relationship with the essence of what's within it.
Okay.
Everything else is a distraction.
Yeah.
Can
Go
I
ahead,
add something?
Kevin.
Yeah, I was thinking, I think at least Carl Jung, he understood the reality of the psyche. It's not so much the psyche is within us, it's more that we are in it. And I also think, like, you know, whether it's images, whether it's physical, whether it's something, it's all a part of this, what Stuart called, at least how I view it, as aliveness. You know, it's not separated. You know, if we work with the images, it's not separated from our being in that sense. You know, it's not separated from who we are as a person in that sense. It just adds something to what's already there. The question is, you know, is a person willing to discover it? You know, like, you know, are you willing to dive, basically, and perhaps drown? And I think that's very few people that are able to do that. But I think the benefit of that, it's at least wholeness. The term wholeness, at least in how they understand it in Jungian approach. You know, not
Hillman
just.
has, okay.
Yeah, that was just it, basically.
Yeah, well, Hillman, wait till you hear how he describes wholeness and completion. But, you know, remember, I just was say that in alchemy, man is to be not redeemed. He is the redeemer of the images that are trapped in physis, you know, in the prima materia. And the idea is we lend our attention, we are in service to the image, it becomes alive, then we speak with it. And that's the method of where the transcendent function happens of individual symbol creation, you know, where the symbol can be created, which is now is the savior, not just is now the savior, or is the product of the saving thing for both the ego and for the image. Is it is their what they bring into birth. But the idea is the image has to be is the divine child. It's definitely not dead. You know, I mean, at least the symbol is the divine child. Go ahead. Or it's the philosopher's stone. Yeah.
Dr. Stan said once, like, symbolism is reality. You know, it's reality. I don't know quite what he meant by it, but what I figure from it is, like, even in alchemy, in the middle you have the picture of Hermes, and in the middle you have the picture of Hermes, and so that's in a sense where consciousness moves in and out. You know, and if we're gonna go to the root of something, we would need to trace that, I think. And I think one of the most important thing is at least through symbolism and images. You know, that's, you know, consciousness is felt, you know, throughout body and so on, but the unconscious processes and so on, you know, that really needs to be dragged out, you know. And so yeah, and that requires work, you know. That's, like you said, the extraction of yeah, mercury, or yeah.
Well, go ahead, Adam, and then you'll have the last word. And
yeah,
go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, for me, everything that we're talking about is super valuable. You know, just one thought that came to me, and it's been sort of coming in different ways, is for me, it's important to remember that, like, another person is not a symbol. Another person is another person, you know? So, like, I just want to make sure for me, you know, that I'm not getting confused between my own ideas about things and this, you know, dialogue with the symbol and stuff. I need to be able to give another person freedom to be who they are. And in the same way, that gives me the freedom to be who I am. All this stuff that I feel like we're doing, I feel like it's a process that can facilitate that, but it's not like the end in itself. But that's an open question, you know? I mean, I'm interested in your points of view about that. But
yeah, well, the daemon, are we willing to let the daemon be its own self, you know? And I mean, apply what you just said to the daemon, you know, and I think is true as well. Well, now we'll finish the, I think this is a very valuable work, and it's nice to say it out loud because it makes it adds a little more resonance. So I'll just finish it up next time, and we might, and we'll leave about a half hour at the end for discussion. So we'll just spend the first hour just going over some text, and then the last half hour for discussion, because it's very rich. And then next time we'll read the chapter. We probably won't get to it, but it's the one by von Franz on to the beyond, which is from Jung's biography. Elizabeth, if you don't have, if you could just share your email address, we'll put you on the email link.
Yeah.
And I, go ahead.
Here?
Yeah, if you could just put your email, and then you'll be on our email link, and I will send out PDFs of all the books that we're reading, which the next one is going to be Jung's Myth in Our Time, and the one after that is going to be this wonderful compilation of Jung's active imaginations by Joan Chodreau, you know.
Okay.
But anyway, just either that, or you can text me on Facebook, either way. But
Oh,
anyway,
I just sent you my email. I just
okay.
wrote my email in the chat. You can find
Okay,
it.
perfect. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And I thought this was, I think we're getting into some meaty subjects here. So anyway, well, I'll talk to you all next time. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Yeah, thank you. Bye now.
Have a good day.